Good evening, everybody. This evening I'm going to read something from our resident Kruba Ajahn Pasanno. It's the book Abundant, Exalted, Immeasurable, which is taken from his 2008 Metta retreat. And I was just going to read one chapter in here and see how the time goes. And there's some interesting questions and answers that I'll fill the time out with. So I'm going to start reading with the chapter called Skillful Thinking in Meditation. Directing thought to loving kindness is a skillful way of using and applying the mind that allows us to build a momentum of wholesomeness. In meditation, when we are trying to calm and still the mind, I think it's a common tendency to try to eliminate thinking and get rid of the thinking mind. A common equation comes up. I think, therefore I suffer. If I didn't think, I wouldn't suffer. Buddhism is for overcoming suffering, so I must annihilate thinking. Usually what happens then is either the thinking explodes or we tie ourselves in knots trying not to think. We might be quite successful at pushing it down and suppressing thought, but it never feels very good. Directing thought to loving kindness is a skillful way of using and applying thought in a way that allows the mind to build a momentum of skillfulness and wholesomeness. The thoughts are increasingly on the side of kusala. The very nature of kusala citta is that it's peaceful, settled, and has a steady quality to it. Another useful way of directing thought is to the aspects of what is in Pali is called samvega, urgency, the sense that there is no time to waste or to fool around. One of the reflections that the monastics are encouraged to cultivate on a regular basis is, the days and nights are relentlessly passing. How well am I spending my time? That's a very useful reflection because it is real. Days and nights are relentlessly passing. They don't pass benignly. Each day that passes, we're older and much closer to death. That's the reality. I managed to make it through another day, but still I have death as a reality that I'm going to have to face. Excuse me. So that is the sense of urgency, letting time slip by in a way that's frivolous, empty, or propping up old habit patterns, recycling our trusty companions of greed, hatred, and delusion. Where does that get us? We've all done it. We've all seen that it's not so fruitful. Bringing up those motivations for urgency, aging, sickness, and death, the impermanence and uncertainty of the mind and its moods is a skillful antidote to complacency. It is not something to flog ourselves with and turn into a neurotic obsession, but it's something that is essential in terms of needing to prod ourselves and not waste opportunities. Urgency is not a frantic quality in the mind. A sense of urgency is a sense of motivation. Yes, I want to get up and moving, get up and have the opportunity to use the time skillfully, to develop virtue, to train in that which is peaceful, and to establish myself in wisdom and discernment. These are motivations. Again, it's not to turn urgency into something that's frantic or manic or a manic edge to it. That isn't particularly useful, but it is helpful to have a sense of urgency. Samvega is a very positive mental state and motivation. As we use directed thought, it's helpful in meditation or in ordinary circumstances to be able to review the 5 hindrances. These particular tendencies of mind are the fundamental qualities that bring us to a place of non-peacefulness and a lack of clarity. So to review the 5 hindrances, sense desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, and doubt. In terms of directed thought, see if they are present, how to work with them, and how they arise. If there is sensual desire, what are we directing our thought towards? We are usually directing thoughts towards something we perceive as pleasurable, delightful, and capable of gratification, so that directed thought is then grabbed by the hindrances and defilements and ends up by agitating the mind. When thought is directed towards ill will, aversion, irritation, anger, and displeasure, then it feeds the hindrance. That feeding of the hindrance makes it healthy and strong. We don't want healthy and strong hindrances. We would be better off starving them. Don't feed them. I remember Ajahn Pasanno saying one time, you've got a cat that comes around, meow, 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 and you think, this poor cat, and you feed it. Sure enough, it comes back on the porch every morning. At Abhayagiri, people wonder why we don't have any dogs or cats. Yeah, the times have changed a little. If you feed them, they keep coming around, and they usually tell their friends as well. If what we are doing with our hindrances is feeding them, we end up with multiple hindrance attacks. Pay attention instead to, if I don't feed it, if I don't direct thought towards the stimulus of hindrance, then it fades. That opens up a space and we can direct attention positively, especially with ill will. The positive directing of thought towards metta is very skillful and application of directed thought. Sloth and torpor happen when we direct thoughts towards fullness after the meal. We feel a certain lassitude and disinterest. That feeds sloth and torpor. So, just as a training, don't let the mind rest on things that would tend towards sloth and torpor, to dullness. If we pay attention to it, then the mind absorbs into it. So that lassitude and dullness starts to take over. Withdraw attention and thought from those areas of the mind that are obscure, dull, and amorphous, especially in meditation. Different mental states drift in and drift out of the mind. If we let the mind dwell on more obscure, amorphous, and drifty states of mind, that's where we end up, a mind that's very dull. So it's important to direct attention and feed the ability of the mind to focus and center on something that's brightening, sharpening, and clarifying. How we direct our attention and thought is the same with restlessness and doubt. So the 5 hindrances are a very useful area of reflection in terms of how best to bring up and establish attention. Because when we do direct attention in a way that is not dissipated through the distraction of the 5 hindrances, then the mind actually becomes very steady and strong. There is a strength there. The Buddha compares it to a mountain stream. If the stream comes down from the mountain and is channeled off into different little channels and rivulets, the power of the stream is dissipated. If it's not able to wash anything away. That is compared to the energy and flow of the mind as it is dissipated out into the 5 hindrances. When it goes off into these different hindrances, the strength of the current or stream is just not so strong. Of course, the opposite is true. When the stream comes down and is not dissipated, it has tremendous power and can be used for something beneficial. At Abhayagiri, we're trying to set up a micro-hydro system. If the stream goes off and on in all sorts of different directions, all you get is a piddly little amount. The turbine goes kerchunk, kerchunk, and you get no power or electricity. Whereas if you get that channel going in one direction, you can generate a lot of electricity, and you don't have to pay the electricity company. This is natural. These are attributes of nature. It's just the mind, but it's important to be attentive and recognize how these patterns and tendencies work. Then, what happens when we direct thought in a particular way towards the hindrances? What is the result when we are able to ameliorate and set aside the 5 hindrances and allow the attention to settle and focus? Since the theme of this retreat is metta, as the 5 hindrances go away, go into abeyance, we can bring more attention to the metta nimitta and allow that to shine forth. We can then direct thought in a way that supports the feeling of well-wishing softness within the heart and brightness that holds oneself and others dear. Allow thought to be directed to the feeling of loving kindness. Thoughts are to help as reminders, underlying them in a particular feeling of spaciousness and warmth in the mind and heart. Allow that to establish itself through the body, directing it towards yourself. The mind is able to keep guarding this sustained and application of thought or feelings of loving kindness. The Pali words are vitaka and vichara. Vitaka is the form, is what is translated as thought or directed thought, but it's both the thought and the bringing forth of thought, feeling or perception up into the mind. That's all vitaka. Arising of thought of loving kindness and directing of attention to loving kindness, whether on the level of thought, feeling, or perception, are all vitaka. Vichara is the sustaining or continuing of that, but there is also an evaluation that goes on. How am I holding it? How is it sustaining itself? What does it feel like? What is its texture? There is the initial bringing up of attention into the mind. Then there is sustaining of that. There is an evaluation, but it's not an intellectual evaluation. It's getting a feeling for the texture of that thought and feeling within the mind so that it's sustained and we are able to look at it in a different way. Vitaka is bringing that up into view within the mind in the same way that I've just lifted up a bell striker. Vichara is looking at it from different angles. There is an interest there, able to sustain it. We get distracted, okay then, vitaka, bring it back up again. That's what we are doing with thoughts of loving kindness or the meditation object of any time. We are using that process of directed thought and evaluation so that there is a gaining of momentum of interest and attention towards that object. With the object of loving kindness, it's that feeling. It's not going to be homogeneous or consistent, but that is how we use vitaka and vichara. We are not trying to make it absolutely consistent. Directed thought and evaluation recognize those different textures and maintain the basic theme of loving kindness. Of course, the same is true in terms of whatever meditation object we are using, say the breath. That is what makes the breath interesting. We can determine to make this breath interesting just by focusing. It's through looking at it, lifting it up, and viewing it from different angles that we can do that. Then the mind is able to settle a bit longer and stay steadily on it. Then part of the evaluation is recognizing that this is starting to feel good. My body is feeling more comfortable and settled. So there is a recognition of the effect. With loving kindness as the meditation object, we encourage ourselves with samvega. We are attentive to the 5 hindrances, and then we direct thought and evaluation to the object of loving kindness. One of the very powerful aspects of loving kindness is that as loving kindness gets stronger, the tendency towards ill will and aversion drops. It can't land in the mind so easily. There is a very strong positive force that also then helps ameliorate the other hindrances that are akusala. It's a really good bridge towards the steadiness of mind that we are cultivating in conjunction with mindfulness of breathing and awareness of the body. Loving kindness allows the mind to make the bridge between the point where the hindrances are still kicking in a bit and a place where it is more exclusively wholesome and settled. Wholesome and bright mental states rely on loving kindness. The sense of seclusion from sensual desire and unwholesome mental states creates a very real shift through which the mind can then settle into its object. Whether that object is the metta, nimitta, or the breath depends on what we are comfortable with. But metta provides a very stable bridge into that steadiness of mind where the mind is able to unify. Unification of the mind is disrupted by those little rivulets going off in different directions to sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness, or doubt. Allow the mind to bridge that gap and develop interest in something that is more positive. It's quite natural. As human beings, we are hardwired to prefer pleasure to pain. So if we can see something that is really pleasurable, then the mind can unify with that. Something as pleasurable as the feeling of loving kindness is able to bridge across the habit patterns of restlessness, doubt, or drifting, and go to that steadiness of mind. As we practice and work with Vitakka and Vichara, by bringing up and sustaining positive thought, something pleasurable, bright, and joyful arises in the mind. We are not doing anything wrong. It's all right to feel that. You may get excited and start to analyze. Instead, give yourself permission to enjoy meditation. As human beings, we are haplessly bumble into old patterns. Here I'm back, suffering again. At least it's familiar and feels secure. Rather, allow the mind to explore the regions of well-being and happiness. Confidence can be there because it's not just pleasure arising out of trying to get something gratifying in terms of sensual hits. It's more deeply satisfying and joyful when it's based on purity of intention and an unalloyed quality of skillfulness. It's wholesome. In the story of the Buddha, when he was still a bodhisattva and striving for awakening, he struggled with ascetic practices. He got to the point where he was emaciated and frustrated. He then had a memory of when he was a young child, becoming very peaceful and settled and concentrated when he was left on his own during a ceremony. He was about 9 years old, and his mind went into stillness. He recalled that memory and wondered, why am I afraid of that happiness that it is untainted? Why am I afraid of that happiness that is untainted by sensuality and unskillfulness tendencies? Perhaps that's the path. There was a realization that there is actually nothing wrong with that kind of happiness. Then the Buddha thought that he would never be able to cultivate that path in his emaciated shape, so he started eating again. That is when he had the insight into the middle way. So, cultivation relies on directed thought and uses the investigation process, the ability to pay attention and allow the mind to channel its energies, not attending to things that are disruptive to the mind, but being able to sustain attention on those things that are nurturing to the mind and heart. That is how the mind is able to unify. It doesn't happen by chance or by sitting long enough, as if you were going to get peaceful if you put in enough hours. In my early years as a monk, I remember another monk in my monastery. He had been ordained for several years, but he never appeared very peaceful to me. As I got to know him, I found that from the time he first started meditating, he had a journal and kept track of every meditation session he had ever had and how many hours and minutes he had meditated. It was kind of like, if I build my account up enough, somehow I'm going to get peaceful. Well, no. You have to be doing it the right way. You actually have to be skillful. So learn those skills of directing attention. What do you feed? What do you feed? What do you starve? What do you pay attention to? What do you ignore? What do you encourage? What do you discourage? It takes some discernment and reflection. Then recognize that there is an intrinsic effect of different mental states, such as anger, ill will, restlessness. They have an intrinsic effect on the mind and are agitating. loving kindness, the quality of compassion, respect for truth. These are all things that have a deep settling effect in the heart. So allow the mind to attend to that. Allow the mind to sustain that attention, and then realize how the mind can unify, relying on that. Sometimes there are overtones of interpretation or meaning that come from a particular word, from particular words. When we talk about concentration, just the word concentration tends to have a feeling of me concentrating, focusing my mind on something and holding it there. But that doesn't really convey what we actually do. Unification, on the other hand, involves directing thought, evaluation, joy, and well-being. The mind can be unified in the sense that it is unified in this feeling of well-being and peace, of being very settled and steady. It's working together and comes together in a place of steadiness. So these are some reflections for this evening's meditation. I can read still a little time, I can read a question and answer. Question. When I think of people with spontaneous, open, and generous hearts, they are full of metta, karuna, and mudita, but they do not seem equanimous. Can upekkha come naturally as well as be cultivated? Answer. I think it is really more a result of cultivation, because it isn't immediately apparent in human experience that equanimity has value. We can see the value in loving kindness, compassion, karuna, and sympathetic joy, freedom from jealousy, but it isn't immediately apparent what is good about equanimity. The others are more bound with becoming and all the positive connotations we have associated with a good human being. We don't appreciate the sense of upekkha, the equanimity and equipoise and balance, until we start to reflect and investigate and see how difficult it actually is to sustain that, to be present with something, not moved by circumstance, not moved internally with moods or impressions within the mind. When we say not moved, it doesn't mean dull, shut down, or closed off, but being completely in tune, very clear, and not being shaken by anything. It takes some time to appreciate that and then recognize that this is going to take some cultivation and work. Of course, when we recognize the benefits of not being dragged into our own internal or external reactivity or expectations of the world around us, there is tremendous freedom in that quality of equanimity. As we cultivate and attend to the qualities of metta, karuna, and mudita, as we become more attuned to the sublime nature of these wholesome qualities, then we also start to recognize the nature of the mind, in the sense that our desires are always outstripping our experience. So you get the latest gadget, and it has more memory and it's faster. I'd like one of those. We do the same thing in our spiritual practice. It can torment us, but it's quite natural. When it's channeled, we can try to put it to skillful use. As we cultivate loving kindness and compassion, we can think, well, that's pretty good, but I bet there's something more. Well, in fact, there is. Equanimity is the refinement of that allows us to be drawn towards true peace. And another one here. This one's a little funny sounding. Okay, question. I have an ongoing problem with certain vibrations. Here the most problematic is the recording device. I guess the recorder in the room at the retreat. The trunk of my body feels like it's vibrating as it moves into the room, just like the hum of the machine. When I get some concentration and I can see the fear, the doubt, and thoughts that arise, that I sometimes meet them skillfully and other times I lose skillful means. Any suggestions would be most gratefully received. Answer. One approach would be turning into the body itself, recognizing that we can influence the feelings around us. Particularly internally, if something is agitating, we can pay attention to something like the breath or feeling somewhere in the body, picking a spot that feels comfortable, bringing our attention to that place that feels at ease. It's easy for the mind to home in on something that we are irritated by or feel uncomfortable with. That's what grabs attention. But conscious directing of attention to something that is more soothing and comfortable is a necessary part of living a human life, because we are constantly surrounded by things that we dislike or are pleasant or unpleasant or agreeable or disagreeable. If the mind drifts into and homes into disagreeable and unpleasant things that we dislike, then we keep spinning around that. Certainly, the definition of loving kindness that I've used on several occasions is dwelling in non-aversion. It's really is a really helpful tool. Meet the practice that dwelling in non-aversion is a helpful base because of the nature of the world. One of the classic structures or aspects of the teaching is the worldly dhammas: praise and blame, honor and disrepute, happiness and suffering, and gain and loss. These are the basic things that are going on all the time. It's easy to be drawn into or be fearful of, say, criticism, to be elated when we get a bit of praise and try to manipulate the conditions so that there's more praise and less criticism, more gain and less loss. It's natural, but it's also energy intensive. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's much more helpful from the perspective of practice to see that there is that which is pleasant and unpleasant, success and failure, whether it is material, worldly, or in spiritual practice. Allow that to take place and allow it to be there without being drawn into the things that generate the unskillful tendencies or that tend to create more agitation and suffering in the mind. As a young monk, watching Ajahn Chah, it was tremendously inspiring. It was as if he was this peaceful, happy presence in the center of the universe. Things happened around him all the time. People praised him, people criticized him. Many people were drawn to him. Monks would ordain out of inspiration, monks would leave out of frustration and disillusionment. And Ajahn Chah was always happy regardless. You realize that is a real possible in the human condition. You don't need to have conditions that are always perfect. Ajahn Chah really didn't have a life of his own. He was just there for people. He wasn't looking to have anything special for himself. The nature of the world is such that there's always things that jar or grate, as well as things that are pleasant. We obviously don't go around trying to find things that are jarring or grating just to test ourselves or to make ourselves strong. We have enough of that in ordinary circumstances. So it's more of how to work with letting go with loving kindness. These are the tools.
All right. I think this is more like a kind of a funny, curious question, but I was thinking about your story when you're talking about, with you're reading the story about the Buddha when he was 9 years old during a ceremony, and he found this peacefulness. And I remember when I was a child, I think many of us have done that, like just staring to the sky and the cloud. This kind of like, you're staring at the cloud and the sky or a tree, but then you kind of lose yourself in it, almost like samadhi. You're just in this kind of emptiness. And I was wondering if it's easier for children, like at what age to practice. Is there anything in the Pali Canon where the Buddha says this is an appropriate age to practice the Dhamma? The defilements, are they not as strong in a child? Or are they the same, just different? And then also this, the ego is probably not as strong as a child, because that identity or the society that tells them what they should be and how they should act and all that, it's not so strong in them yet. So I think that was like a lot, but just in general, is there any teaching about teaching children?
Well, there's nothing specifically that I can recall, directly talking about like, okay, you're 7 years old, it's time to start meditating. But there's accounts of children, arahants. I think a 7-year-old was the youngest I recall. So it does happen, but but yeah, I've never encountered any kind of framework for some kind of teaching specifically for children in regards to meditation. Let's see if I could. And as far as the other questions, I think like if you have confidence or faith in rebirth, then you would have to assume if someone's reborn, then they're carrying kilesas in them. And even though like a child may appear, a newborn may appear quite innocent and untainted, there's still kilesas in there. They just haven't had the opportunity to manifest until the child gets older, and then these underlying tendencies start to show, from the vipaka kama and the current, whatever conditioning they're getting as they're growing up. So I think my humble opinion, I would just think it would be on a case-by-case situation, whether somebody is interested or drawn to learning meditation or not. There's just so many different causes and conditions that have to be present for some, a child to even be exposed to the opportunity to learn meditation or the Dhamma. And you had like 5 different questions in there.
I think I have one more question. Is what is the youngest age a child could ordain? Maybe as not like a samanera, but I guess so. In like the Thai tradition in the monastery.
In Thailand, children will. I'm not sure how young it'll go, but sometimes it can be, quite young. Children. They'll call them dekwats. They'll be. I think that there actually would be novices. But yeah,
old enough to scare crows.
Oh, that's right.
Old enough to scare crows.
Yeah. And they can't, if they wanted to ordain as a bhikkhu, they would have to wait until they were 20.
Wow. 7 or 8. Okay.
When I was in Thailand, I saw a public service kind of a thing on a TV program while I was there. It was Lumpa Naik, and it was about just a little condensed little thing, but it was quite beautiful. He was training these little novices, and they're all probably between the ages of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, something like that. A big 12 of them or so, and it just shows them going through, learning how to put their robes on, learning how to, go out for alms, and it was quite a beautiful scene. So they looked like they were really into it. So.
That's sweet. Thank you.
It's like that, like a little baby grizzly bear or a tiger or a lion. Oh, you could probably play with it and it'd be quite, sweet and all. But someday it might just eat you, without any regret. So, I think it just takes time for these things to kind of fully manifest themselves in children.